where do you see someplace like Amsterdam fitting into the picture here, and both in terms of the economy, the supply chain, but also the larger moral picture? And also, I was hoping you could talk a little bit more about this coalition that you had mentioned, where you see it gaining traction, who's constituting it. And then also, one of my philosophy professors argued that rape was actually the highest moral crime that one could commit, because you can make arguments for self-defense in the case of murder, but there's no morally defensible position that you can take for rape. So what would you say would be the best ways to elevate this risk, the real risk, to these people in the middle of the supply chain?
Right. Well, excellent points that give me an opportunity to talk about some important issues. Amsterdam is an interesting case study. Amsterdam and Sweden took sort of polar opposite positions on the legalization debate. Amsterdam has a long history of a red light area, and in the year 2000, they legalized brothels. The idea was, if you legalize the sex industry, you can monitor it, you can provide for more protections, health screening, police protection, unions, retirement benefits, et cetera, et cetera. The problem appears to be that the legalization of prostitution provided sort of a legal veneer behind which greater exploitation could take place. I spent a fair amount of time in Amsterdam talking to a lot of people who deal with this issue on the front lines, and they've said since legalization took place in 2000, there's been a marked increase in the number of foreign women working in the red light district, a lot of whom are trafficking victims. And the supposed police inspections and protections and other things that were supposed to be sort of concomitant to legalization didn't really happen. Bribes from so-and-such brothel owner paid to the mayor who's supposed to order the inspections meant the inspections didn't happen. So much so that just recently, actually, the mayor of Amsterdam sort of acknowledged that this may not be the best policy. There seems to be an increase in trafficking levels, and they're thinking of closing down several brothels, if not out and out reversing the legalization of brothels in Amsterdam. Now, Sweden, on the other hand, in 1999 passed the first kind of major blanket prohibition and criminalization of solicitation of sex services, running a brothel, everything. And the idea was, there's a great quote from a government official, in a democratic society that values freedom and equality, there's no place for prostitution, which is inherently a form of subordinating women. And they have provided data that shows in that same period of time, roughly the last 8 or 9 years, similar to Amsterdam when they legalized, there's been a marked decrease in trafficking levels, solicitation of prostitutes, and that much of it has shifted to the neighboring countries, Denmark, Norway. Now, this is still preliminary data, but one can imagine that there's some merit to the way this is kind of unfolded on a case study basis. The coalition. There are 4 main impediments to more effective response to sex trafficking. The first is, of course, that the crime itself remains poorly understood. The second is that the NGOs that are trying to deal with this on the front lines are underfunded and uncoordinated internationally. The third is that the laws against these crimes are overwhelmingly anemic and poorly enforced. And the fourth is that, at least hopefully until my book, a more detailed sort of economic understanding of the crimes hadn't really been put forth. The coalition I describe and the tactics I propose are meant to address these 4 main impediments to a more effective response to sex trafficking. So there's a coalition I describe that would consist of 2 units. One would be focused on the victims. More robust, well-funded, and systematized care for former slaves, including protections. Right now in shelters, you can only stay a few months because there's too few beds, too little money. They're back on the streets like Inez, and we know what happens then. So more funding, more protections, including income and remittances for at least 12 months while they attempt to participate in the jurisprudence process. A lot of prosecutions and convictions fall apart because victims are too frightened due to threats. They need income. They have to leave the shelter. They can't just sit around. They have to try to find a job, etc. So one unit focuses on this, and I think it needs about $60 or $65 million a year to do this effectively and do it right. The other unit is going to be dedicated to designing and deploying the optimal tactical interventions that will thwart demand by elevating real risk in the sex trafficking business chain. I think that unit needs closer to, I think, $290 million or so a year to do that.